Which do you think is more important, your faith in God or God's faith in you? There's a story told in the life of Jesus. It was one of the parables that Jesus told. He told the story of the man who planted wheat in his field. And sometime later, his servants came to him to say that an enemy had planted weeds amongst the wheat. And the servants asked the owner if they should remove the weeds. And the owner said to them, "Don't remove the weeds, because in doing so, you could possibly remove some of the good wheat as well." He said, "Let it go until harvest time," and then he said the separation could take place. And I think this is a very good image of how God works in his world. We look at the world today and we see its many problems. We see violence, we see war, we see some terrible things, we see some terrible evil, and we see good. But it seems that God isn't intervening. God doesn't come down to get rid of the bad people. He seems to allow the bad and the good to grow together. And the same is true presently in our Catholic Church. Over the past 4 months, we've been hearing much about the scandal in the church. Terrible sin, crime, cover-up, child abuse. And it's looking very ugly. And so we're seeing the dark side of the church. And we as Catholics don't like to see that. But again, you see, it's God's church. Jesus founded the church. And it seems that God in his church allows the good and the bad. And then take each one of us. Nobody here is completely good. And nobody here is completely bad. Inside of all of us, we carry within us the good and the bad. And then we think about the 12 apostles, the 12 men who were selected by Jesus himself. And we think about how weak they were. These men had special training over 3 years at the hands of Jesus. And yet, they showed themselves to be very weak. Peter, we know, denied Jesus when Jesus was arrested and put on trial. Peter said he never knew Jesus Christ. And then we know that Thomas doubted the resurrection of Jesus, and Judas betrayed Jesus. And we do know that all 12 apostles, apart from Peter, ran away when Jesus was arrested. And yet, Jesus did not lose faith in those 12 men. He did not give up on them. And then on this day, which is Pentecost Sunday, 2,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened to those 12 men. They were filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, and they were changed forever. And they went out and did extraordinary things in the Word. We know that 11 of the 12 died as martyrs for the faith. So there's a beautiful example of how Jesus, knowing the weaknesses of the 12, refused to give up on the 12. He kept believing in them, and then brought about this extraordinary day of Pentecost when these men were transformed forever. And I think an interesting thing to consider too is that Judas, it was Judas who stopped believing in Judas. Judas gave up on Judas. Jesus did not give up on Judas. Jesus continued to believe in Judas. But Judas stopped believing in Judas. And you see, this is what we do as human beings. When a crisis arrives in our lives, we can lose faith. We can stop believing in ourselves. We can stop believing in others. We can stop believing in God. We can stop believing in the church. And this is the way humans operate. one day their faith is strong, another day their faith is weak, depending on what they're dealing with in life. But the wonderful thing about God is that He never loses faith in the world. Even though the world looks so bad at times, so much corruption, so much that is wrong, God created the world, and He never stops believing in it. And you see, God founded the church, and He will never stop believing in His church. God sees deeply into the church. He sees the beauty that exists there. And even though I stop believing in me, God will never stop believing in me. In fact, I have great faith in the faith that God has in me. And you see, God will never stop believing in any one of us. Even the most evil sinner on this earth, God will not stop believing in that person. And we find that hard to understand because we as human beings tend to give up easily. We lose faith in others. We can lose faith in government. We give up so easily. But God is so different. He never gives up. He never stops believing. And you see, we'll go to heaven not because of our faith in God. It will be much more because of God's faith in us. And I believe that during this crisis right now in the church, something extraordinary could happen as a result of it, something very beautiful. We're going through tremendous pain. I know some of you probably are feeling very confused, maybe very angry, feeling betrayed by the clergy. I know I myself feel angry from time to time. I feel discouraged. But then I begin to think about the wonderful faith that we have, how extraordinary it is, and I begin to reach down deeply into it, and I realize that we're so blessed to have what we have. And maybe what this crisis is saying to us is that it's asking us to consider the fact that each one of us is the church. We tend to look upon the cardinal and the bishops as the church, but they are the hierarchy. But we know that through baptism, each one of us is the church. Each one of you sitting here in the pew is the church. So maybe what Jesus is asking for now is that the church rise up in each one of us. Maybe a new Pentecost is about to happen. Today I'm wearing red vestments because it's Pentecost Sunday. And red symbolizes the fire of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit wants to set us on fire. He wants to set each one of us on fire. And maybe this is what will happen as a result of this encounter with the pain of the scandal in the church. And in conclusion, I would like to read something to you. It was something that was written by a great mystic, a great spiritual writer. He was a monk who lived in the desert in his latter years. In his earlier years, he was an activist. He believed in a very active expression of his faith as a Catholic. So as a young man, he confronted injustice in the world. He confronted injustice in the church. And he was outspoken and very active. And then in later life, he seemed to withdraw from the active life and went into the desert. But he has written many beautiful books, profoundly spiritual. And but he grappled with his church. He could see the flaws in his church. He could see what was wrong with the church. And there were times he was so angry with his church. And so he wrote this tribute to the church, expressing his feelings about the church. And I would like to read it to you now. It's by Carlo Corretto. And the words go as follows. He's speaking to his church. And he says, "How much I must criticize you, my church, and yet how much I love you. You have made me suffer more than anyone, and yet I owe more to you than anyone. I should like to see you destroyed, and yet I need your presence. You have given me such scandal, and yet you alone have made me understand holiness. Never in this world have I seen anything more compromised, more false. And yet never have I touched anything more pure, more generous, or more beautiful. Countless times I have felt like slamming the door of my soul in your face. And yet every night I have prayed that I might die in your sure arms. No, I cannot be free of you, for I am one with you, even if not completely you. And then if I were to leave you, where would I go? Would I build another church? And if I built another church, I would find in it the same defects and faults which I find in you and which I find in myself. And if I were to build another church, it would be my church. It would not be Christ's church. No, I am not old enough. I know better.